My name is Drew Waldron, and I am on with former NASA astronaut, best-selling author, and the first person to tweet from space, Mike Massimino. Mike, it's great to sit down with you.
Drew, thanks so much. It's great seeing you, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a lot of pressure on me right now because one of the last interviews I saw you do was with Cal Penn on The Daily Show. So
Yeah,
to go from that to me, I'm really feeling the pressure, but I'm still excited for it.
I'm happy with both of these interviews. But yeah, that was a fun one. That was definitely a fun one with Cal.
Absolutely. And you were on The Daily Show promoting the recent release of your newest book,
Mhm.
Moonshot, which is a book that takes the stories and insights you've gained at NASA and applies them as guides to different facets of accomplishment. Now, what has your experience been like writing and releasing this project?
It was really very enjoyable and fulfilling. Drew, since I left NASA now almost 10 years ago, and since that time I've been speaking to many audiences. And what I was very happy to find out is that a lot of the lessons that I learned at my time at NASA to service the Hubble Space Telescope and be a successful astronaut, lessons I learned in perseverance and leadership and teamwork and problem solving and dealing with change and so on, these same lessons apply to what people are dealing with on Earth, whether it's at home or in their cubicle, in the meeting rooms, in their daily lives. It kind of evolved over time. What were the stories that resonated the most with folks? Dealing with new technology or the infiltration of AI or whatever it might be into their world. I found that a lot of my lessons were helpful, and there was, it depended on the audience of what would be most helpful. But that's what this book is. It's a collection of, I would say, my top 10 list of helpful things I learned as an astronaut that resonated with the audience most.
I love that application. And one of those things, one of your top tens is something that you refer to as the 30-second rule. Now, for
Mm.
someone who's unfamiliar with what that is, can you explain the 30-second rule?
A little background on that is that I make a lot of mistakes, Drew, and so does everybody. And we don't mean to make mistakes
Yeah.
or mess up or just do. Oh man, I can't believe I did that. Now, if I could only live that one over, just feeling bad about what happens. And sometimes I found myself as an astronaut, I didn't want to mess up. I don't want to make any mistakes, but I found myself kind of getting really mad at myself, and in my training in the simulator and working in the pool, we train underwater for our spacewalks and big spacesuits. And so a lot of it was hands-on, and you'd break something or you'd forget something, you just mess something up, make a mistake. And I felt terrible about it, but it happens to everybody. And so it's not so much trying to avoid mistakes. I mean, you try to do that, but it's also how do you deal with a mistake once you make it. I was in a simulator and made a mistake, and learned this from a guy named CJ Sturkow. He said, give yourself 30 seconds of regret. He called it, I think, 30 seconds of remorse. He was a Marine pilot. He called it give it 30 seconds of remorse and move on. I also spoke to my friend Megan MacArthur about this. We were talking about making mistakes. I flew in space with her, and we both adopted CJ's principle, which is when you make a mistake, no matter how bad it is, you have to move on from it. People say, let mistakes pass, move on, don't ruminate in it. But how do you do that? And that's when you employ the 30-second rule. So this is the 30-second rule, Drew. You make that mistake and you just say to yourself, that is the stupidest mistake I've ever. Give yourself a 30-second timeout. And it really helped me on the Hubble Space Telescope. I stripped a bolt on the telescope. We didn't know if we were going to be able to recover and fix the telescope that day. It was the easiest thing to do on the whole day. It was just removing this one bolt that was an easy bolt, and I messed it up. And now we had to figure out a way to get around it. And it was terrible. And so what I did was I knew I had to move on. We had to try to figure out a solution and move on. So I employed the 30-second rule. I beat myself up for 30 seconds. You are the worst astronaut ever, Mike. How could you? Why did they even select you? Why did they give you this job? You should have just stuck to the easy stuff. This is the dumbest thing you've ever done. You've set astronomy back for centuries. Your legacy is going to be that we wouldn't know the age of the universe, but you broke the Hubble Space Telescope and we'll never. And don't vocalize any of this stuff, though, Drew. You want to keep it to yourself. Keep it in turn because you'll scare people if they hear it. So just keep it to yourself. And that's what I did. I gave myself a 30-second rant. And then after that, 30 seconds is up. Time's up. And get it all out of you in that 30 seconds. And then it's time to move on because your team needs you. You don't have, sometimes before I was an astronaut, I would find myself ruminating on things like for a whole day or a week or even, oh man, this is terrible. And you don't have a whole day or even a minute in space to be upset and not functioning at the highest highest level you can be at. And so I had to learn how to leave those things in the past. And that really helped me. The 30-second rule really helped me. And it helps me every day here on earth because I still make a lot of mistakes, Drew.
Very, very well said. Of course, you should internalize that because I could only imagine if you were just vocally saying that to your support team over the
Oh,
comms and they just had to sit and listen to you rant for 30 seconds.
yeah, they'd be worried.
Of course. I did a lot of research on your life story, and I think one of the most fascinating things about you pre-NASA was the fact that you applied to the program 3 times and you were rejected 3 times because of your eyesight, and they said that they wouldn't accept
Hmm.
any medical procedure. And despite that, despite what most people would deem a clear defeat, you worked to naturally strengthen your eyesight and become eligible for the program. Now, when you're speaking to all these massive crowds that you speak to and passing off your life lessons, how do you try to instill that indomitable level of resilience to your audiences?
What I tell folks is you don't always get the success you want, right? You don't always get to that end goal. Hopefully you do, but it doesn't always happen. But that's okay as long as you're trying. And I knew that what I was trying to do is pretty difficult, being an astronaut. And I remember thinking after my second rejection, the first 2 times I got rejected outright, I just got a letter back from NASA, no thanks. And I remember after my second rejection, I was watching the news and some astronauts were being interviewed on the news, and I stopped for a minute and to watch, and the thought went through my mind that I knew that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an astronaut. And then that was followed up with another thought, which was, but you'll never get a chance to do that. That's impossible. And then I thought about it a little further, and I have an engineering background, and I was like, well, it's not really impossible. It's just really unlikely. It's just a 1 out of a million chance. The first chapter of my book is entitled 1 out of a million is not zero. And it comes from this thought that I had after my second rejection was that as long as you try, as minuscule it is, it's a non-zero outcome. It's a small number. 1 out of a million is 0.00001. But there's a 1 at the end of those zeros as long as you try. And the only way you know the outcome for sure is if you give up. Once you give up, that 1 turns into a 0 and you know what the outcome is going to be. You will not be successful. And you can't always control if you're going to be successful or not. You can control the effort, but not what that outcome is going to be. But you can certainly not give up. When I was faced with the eye problem, that was at my third time I got an interview with NASA, and that's when I failed that eye exam. That was a little bit different because I couldn't even apply again. They said they wouldn't even read my application. The eye exam failure at that time had never been overturned because it's just what you're able to see. And I don't know if now it's all different. Now LASIK is okay under certain conditions, and this is now almost 30 years ago, as it turns out, 28 years ago. But you're faced with the situation you can't even try. And to me, that was really a problem. Any of the other stuff they had to change your eyesight with medical procedure was not accepted. So I thought about it. I was like, I just got to figure out a way to see better somehow. And I learned about vision training, which was done with small kids primarily. And I found a optometrist in Houston that did this. And I told her I could be very immature and she wouldn't know the difference between me and any 10-year-old, and begged her to help me. And she did. And I was able to pick up a couple lines on the eye chart. And then at least I was able to try again. And I was able to submit another application, and I got another interview, and then I was picked. But I think that's the thing to remember, is that you keep getting knocked down. Successful people, whether they're in business or in sports or in music or in science or the astronaut game or whatever it is that people are doing, they're successful people are not those that never fail. They're those who never let failure stop them. And you got to find a way around that obstacle just to try. That doesn't mean that you're actually going to get picked or get the thing you want, but you got to get around those obstacles just to keep your name in the hat, keep in the game. And that's what I thought was most important. And to remember that as long as you try, how unlikely it is, there's a chance. And I don't think I could live with the regret of not trying. I knew I could live with the reality that, well, I just didn't get picked because they had other people they preferred, but I don't think I could live with myself if I gave up. I think that leads to regret that I didn't want. And people, you don't want that in your life. So you want to figure out a way to keep trying no matter what happens. Even if you get knocked down, just keep trying.
Absolutely, living without that regret. What was the reaction like, from NASA when they see this guy who they deemed ineligible and said that they wouldn't look at another application, when you came back and you said, I did it, I beat it, fixed myself without a medical procedure?
Mm-hmm.
What was the administrative reaction like when you came back against all odds?
I think they kind of liked it. I had to convince the doctors. It was interesting because, the selection board and the selection office that handled all these cases, they just needed a thumbs up or a thumbs down from the medical folks.
Mhm.
And when I got the thumbs down from the medical people and was told that I was disqualified, I think, the the selection office and the folks involved with selection, they were kind of disappointed when I spoke to them. They were encouraging. They're like, well, if you could figure out a way to get around it, that would be great. But I don't know how you would do that. So I think it might have demonstrated. I really thought about it that way, Drew, but it might have demonstrated that, hey, this guy can solve problems. Not only that he really wants it, but he was able to figure this one out. That's pretty good. That's harder
Yeah,
than rocket science.
send this man to
So
space now.
yeah, as I think about that, yeah, I didn't even think of it that way. But I was, it certainly showed that I was persistent, but I think it also showed that I was able to solve a problem that didn't have a solution up till then. And I don't know if they really thought about it that way. I think really what it was, is he thumbs up now? Great. Let's, get him back in here and see if we want this guy or not. So I think they were happy for me.
That's incredible. I want to ask you a big question about your first experience up in space. Nearly every single astronaut has shared their personal experiences with the overview effect. For those listening who are unfamiliar, it's the cognitive shift of awe and transcendence that someone gets when viewing the Earth from space. How did that experience you personally?
It changed my perception of our planet. When I looked at the Earth from up there, and I'll quickly show you a shot of Earth here. This is just my
Wow.
a picture of the Middle East here. It's just gorgeous. It's beyond words, really. And when I looked at it, I thought I was looking into heaven. This is a complete paradise. And I thought to myself, we are living in paradise. You see it from up there, but you're seeing it from a distance. You're not engaging the planet. And so what I've done since coming back is I try to be amazed at least once a day by what's around me. And thinking about going back to that view of how beautiful our planet is. And I think you see the true beauty of the planet from far away from it. You can see it, but you can't engage it. Well, when we're here on Earth, we're able to engage it. So whether I'm in a beautiful setting, I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico last week, with the mountains in the background, or whether I'm on the New York City subway system, right, which I frequently am, as I live in New York, I look for the beauty in it, the rhythm of life, the people. I try not to complain about weather anymore, even though I still do. But we don't have any weather in space. We don't have wind or cool breezes, the natural smells that we have around us, of flowers or baking bread or whatever it is. We don't have those things in space. But again, we can admire the planet from up there. So what I've tried to do is think of that, the beauty of that I saw of our planet, and then try to apply it in everyday life and try to be amazed, because it is amazing that we are here, and we're only here for a certain amount of time. We're lucky to be here, and we need to take advantage of it every day. Just try to look around and be amazed by what we have here every day.
Absolutely. I think that it's fantastic that stays with you, what, a decade and a half later after all
Yeah.
this, you still feel that effects?
Think about it every day. That view from the view of our planet was so compelling. I will never forget that. It was emblazoned in my head, and I try to think about it every day and try to be amazed every day, because we are living in an amazing place.
I'd love to experience the overview effect for myself one day, and who knows, privatized space flight, I might be able to.
Why not? Right now, you need a lot of cash. I wouldn't pay that much money. I'd wait for the price to come down.
Yeah, I'll wait a couple decades where it's
Yeah.
going to be a couple hundred, couple
Yeah.
thousand, who knows.
You're a
But
young, you're a young guy. You got plenty of time.
I'll wait.
Yeah.
But that's a great segue into the next thing I wanted to ask you about privatized spaceflight. The privatized spaceflight industry, it's evolved so much over the last 2 decades. Neil Armstrong was famously critical of SpaceX, but as time has gone on, it feels like many more astronauts have embraced the changes that have come with a more involved private spaceflight sector. Now, you personally, what do you think the average American needs to know about the current status of the private spaceflight industry?
I think it's overall a good thing, Drew. I think that it's the access to space has, as you said, to being able to buy a ticket. But it's not just that. The access is of billionaires paying, or countries, more countries can get their astronauts to space with through these private missions. But it's also, like, for example, my students at Columbia have flown, where I teach, I'm a mechanical engineering professor there, have flown 2 experiments to space and are planning another one right now. And that would have been impossible years ago. And both of these things happened in the last 4 years. 10 years ago, this would have never happened. Even 5 years ago. It's very, very recent that now the access to space has been such that students can fly experiments, and research can be done, and opening the doors. And a lot of it is because of the use of AI and technology. And we were pretty, Neil Armstrong, I think, think spoke for how a lot of us felt at the time. We were coming from a very manually controlled vehicle, the space shuttle, which was flown by astronauts manually, where we had to handle not just the things that were planned to happen, but all the emergencies. And most of our training was dealing with emergencies. Very little computing power. We had to know everything. It took years to be proficient at those things. Now you don't have to worry about that because the computer handles it. And there's sometimes I think a natural resistance to change or to technology or to incorporating artificial intelligence into our workplace. But certainly, and we were resistant to that at first. But I think certainly it's shown the benefits of it. So I think that the lesson there is not just a lesson in how the space program, what it's able to do now and where it's leading to and all the great things that can happen, not just in exploration and for governments and in science, but also commercialization for our economy. All those things are wonderful things. But it's also the message, I think, is embrace the technology. That, yeah, I know people are skeptical and there's going to be things that are concern us. There's going to be hiccups. There's going to be changes that need to be made to the technology so that it works correctly and culturally and ethically for us. But it's really a great thing. And this has been, I think, the way it's been throughout history. As a new technology comes in, whatever it is, there's typically some skepticism until we figure out how to use it for our benefit. And we're certainly seeing a big jump in what the space program, not just NASA, but also the commercial space programs, which you mentioned, that they've been able to do because of the improved technology and the reusability too. That's the other thing, is that now just about everything gets reused, and that wasn't the case. We did have some reusable parts on the space shuttle, of course, but it wasn't efficient. It was still very expensive. Now they're able to fly the rocket booster right back to the launch pad or to a platform out in the ocean to reuse it, and so the reusability has brought the cost down, and the automation has increased the opportunities for people to go because it requires less training.
Yeah, I remember the first time that I saw the video of the rocket re-landing on that small pad in the ocean that you were talking
Yeah.
about, and it just blew me away. And kind of on that same line of questioning, with all these incredible proposed plans and
Mhm.
programs and advancements on the horizon for anyone who keeps up with space news, personally, what are you most excited to experience within the next, let's say, decade or so?
I am most excited about us as a world, and that was you mentioned the overview effect. When I think of our planet now, I think of this beautiful planet we live on that we all get to enjoy. But I also think of it as home. When I grew up in Franklin Square, Long Island, just out of New York City, and that was my home. And then New York was my home. I think when I left New York and started going around the country a bit and going to college and grad school and so on, I considered myself a New Yorker. And then as an astronaut, I considered myself an American. I would say I'm an American. I've got the American flag on my shoulder. But then after going to space, when I think of home, I think of home as planet Earth. I think that was somewhat of the overview effect, but I think it was also just going around the planet over and over again. Not only the beauty of it, but the concept of we're all there. Everything I've ever known, everything I've ever experienced has taken place on this one planet. When I think of home, I think of Earth, and it's a place we all share. So I think the programs we're doing now are very international, and I think of them as it's not just the United States, it's other countries working together, and now private companies, and we're using not only the brain power we have at NASA, but also the entrepreneurial spirit that we have in the United States too, has been very helpful in being able to expand what we can do in space. And I think all of those things have come together such that NASA can do more, not just working with these private companies, but also in its directives to leave the planet, to go beyond low Earth orbit, and that is to the moon and to Mars. Right now, I'm most excited about the moon because that's the next step that we're going to be taking with people. And I think doing that, we'll use if we do it right, we'll use the moon as a launching pad to go to Mars. When I first started as a new astronaut in 1996, we created a patch, Drew, and you can see it over here on my shoulder. This is my
Mhm.
astronaut class patch. And if you look, I don't know how well you can see this, but we wanted the patch has the different countries. We had 8 different countries represented in my astronaut class. We thought about, well, what this patch is going to mean. It's going to depict what we think we're going to be doing in the years that all of us will be at NASA as astronauts. And so there's the space shuttle and the space station, which wasn't even started yet, but that's here. But we also have the Earth, the moon, and Mars. We thought one of us might be going not only to the moon, but also onward to Mars. And that didn't happen. But now we have a rocket, the Space Launch System, which can get there, and it tested on the Artemis with the Artemis missions. Artemis 1 launched successfully. There was nobody on board, but it tested the spacecraft and came back safely. SpaceX and other companies are building gigantic rockets. SpaceX, like the Starship, that can go to the moon and beyond. So now it's capable, and we have a crew that has been assigned to go to the moon to do an orbital flight, hopefully sometime next year. And I'm friends with all of these people, these 4 astronauts. When they came to New York to appear on the Colbert Show, they were announced, I think it was a Monday, and on Tuesday they were coming to New York to appear on the Colbert Show and the Today Show.
Mhm.
And when they landed at JFK that afternoon, after they were announced, I got a text from one of them. Victor Glover's like, "Hey, are you around? You want to get together?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love to see you guys." And we met for dinner that night, and the whole crew was there. And I think 3 of them had their spouses with them. It was a big event. It was really a fun evening to be with them. My wife and I met them. But I remember waiting for them outside at a restaurant in New York, and just waiting, looking down the block to see when they're approaching me, and I see them coming, and I walked toward them, and the commander's a guy by the name of Reed Wiseman. And I quickly went up to him and gave him a big hug and said, "I am so happy for you, Reed. I can't even explain it. I'm actually happier for you being assigned, you and your crew being assigned to go to the moon. I think more excited than when I got assigned to my space flights." And he goes, "Mike, I understand. Because I'm gonna feel the same way about it when they schedule the first crew to land on the moon. That it's something we've wanted to looking forward to. The first crew to land on the moon, since the Apollo guys."
Mhm.
Where it's a whole different model. We're not just going for visits. We're going to be going to stay and settle and explore and learn, and then use it as a launching pad to go to Mars. That's the plan. And he says, "Yeah, I'm going to be more excited for that crew than I am for me and my crew getting a chance to go." And that I think kind of sums it up for me, is that seeing people go back to the moon. I saw that. I'm old enough to remember that. I was 6 years old when Neil Armstrong took those steps, and it made me want to grow up to be an astronaut. And I think that is to me going to be a great accomplishment when we get back there. And I'm very excited about that. We've been in low Earth orbit with the space station and the space shuttle for a long time. We've been concentrating on that for over 40 years, and that's been great. We've learned a lot between the shuttle and the space station for the past 20 or so. But now I think going beyond that, and being able to explore the moon and all the communications that have been going on in low Earth orbit, I think that's great. The communication satellites and all that. But going beyond that, and looking for signs of life in the outer reaches of the solar system and beyond, with the James Webb Telescope and with the Hubble Space Telescope. Those are all things that really excite me. But as far as people in space, it's going to the moon. But to me, it represents all of it. It's like really going beyond
Stepping
low
stones.
Earth orbit, and reaching out to the end of our solar system and beyond.
I'm kicking myself because I can't remember who wrote the quote, but I read a quote
Mm.
that said, "The moon is the doorway to forever." And it was in reference to everything you're talking about. Once we get people on the moon, once we settle like everything there and
Yeah,
we're able to use it as the launching point to Mars, like that is the beginning of everything else. And
I
I think
agree.
that's just incredible.
I agree.
Mike, this has been a fantastic conversation, and we always end on one note. I always
All
ask a
right.
very broad question, and you
Yeah.
could answer it however you'd like. What advice do you have for young people?
I guess, and I do speak to a lot of young people.
Columbia, yeah.
Yeah, my teaching. I also work at the Intrepid Museum here in New York City, and there's younger people there. I see young kids all the time. It seems they ask me stuff, and my biggest piece of advice is for anybody. I think whether you're young or old or wherever you are, is to follow your passion, follow what you're interested in. Don't try to game it too much. Like try to think of, this is mainly for the young people, right? Where they're maybe trying to think, what should I major in? I get that question. The question I get a lot is, what do I need to do to become an astronaut? What do I need to study? Or you might think about it any, what do I need to study to become this or that? And I think that's really almost something that's impossible to answer, because everybody's different and their strengths are different and your interests are different. And you should pick what you love, what you're passionate about, and pursue that. And the examples I give are 3 people that I flew in space with. And I've flown with a lot of people in space, and there were some what you might consider traditional occupations that led to the astronaut program. They have test pilots or people in the military. I was an engineer. We had, aerospace engineers and astrophysicists. But also, I flew in space with a geologist, Drew Feustel, who just loved rocks. He wasn't even a planetary geologist, like studying the moon and everything. He knew about Earth. He ended up working in an oil field because he really loved rocks, and exploring and looking down in going through the Earth, and finding out what was underneath the surface and so on. And that led him to being an astronaut, because it's a science, and he was very hands-on with what he was doing with his occupation, and that was a qualifying field, and he became a great astronaut. I also flew in space with an oceanographer, Megan MacArthur, who actually started her education as an aerospace engineer because she wanted to be an astronaut. And then she learned how to scuba dive and fell in love with the ocean and changed her major in grad school to oceanography. And that's a science that is very well respected. And the skills she had very much translated to being an astronaut. And so that led her to being an astronaut. And the third example I can give is a guy I flew with named Rick Linehan, who's a veterinarian. He just loved animals as a kid, but he also wanted to be an astronaut. And he really loved dolphins. He wanted to work with dolphins. And he was working with dolphins. And the story that he tells is that when he was called by NASA that he was going to be an astronaut, he was actually delivering a baby dolphin. He says, all right, I'll call them back. I've got this baby dolphin over here that I'm dealing with. So, but he was a veterinarian. You might not think, well, I want to fly in space, so I'm going to become a veterinarian. I wouldn't think of it that way. Think of it as, what do I love? What am I interested in? And let me pursue that. And if you do that, it's somewhat freeing because you can make clearer decisions. I think, well, I really like math, or I really like biology, or I really like insects, or I really like dinosaurs, or whatever it might be. Or you might like writing or English, or we also don't know how that occupation is going to change. And as we get more and more people to space, we're going to need artists to fly. We're going to need writers to fly. It's not just going to be scientists and engineers. And for the near future, I think it's primarily going to be that, but who knows? It's changing. Filmmakers want to go to space now. So I think if you have an interest, whatever that interest might be, think about what you love and how it might apply to that interest. Think about your passion. What do you like doing? Not even so much about what you're good at, but what do you like doing? What are you interested in trying to do? And follow that with the greatest passion and see where it leads. And I can almost guarantee that'll lead you to a good outcome.
Very well said. Just not botany, because I hear that those guys get left behind on Mars a couple times.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Well, it was. I think that was helpful for for Matt Damon in that movie for sure.
Absolutely. Mike Massimino, I cannot thank you enough for your time. This was an unbelievable conversation. Thank you so, so much for your time.
Thanks, Drew. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. And that will conclude our conversation with Mike Massimino. Thank you again, and thank you for listening.